Okay, any case, like I was explaining, what I'm going to be presenting is a radical rereading of history. Okay, so like we said, Western history is blind to so many of the new things that we're discovering, as in terms of languages, in terms of cultures, in terms of archaeology, in terms of genetics, in terms of distribution of plants, etc., etc. So when we start putting that all together, we get a really different understanding of history than the ones that they put in the history books that we read at school, or even read at university. So it's basically, this is what I'm presenting. So, and of course, it's not the final word. I don't pretend to have the final word and know the one and only truth. I present to you the truth that I have found and that resonates with me. But each one of us has a different resonance. And there are different aspects of the truth that each one of us can only know, because my experience is different from your experience. Every person's experience is different. And that experience allows you to see the truth from a different perspective. So one person can't know the whole truth. We need each other. We need each other's eyes. We need each other's ears. We need each other's experiences. The more we share all of our understandings of the truth, the bigger our understanding of truth. So basically, that's what I'm presenting here. And so I'm really glad when some of you who are experts in bananas and other food crops can help me to expand my understanding of the truth as well. So thank you very much for that too. Anyway, so we left off last time with the Austronesian languages, and it's interesting that the last question was about Austronesian languages as well. So let me get all this started again. As you remember, we were looking at the Austronesian languages, and we were amazed at how far the Austronesian languages spread, all the way from just off the coast of Africa to all the way off just off the coast of South America. And we were talking about that just now. But let's take another look at that map, because there's another Borneo connection there that we really have to look at. Okay, so here's the map we were looking at before. Are the subtitles okay for everybody? And can everybody hear?
Yep, no problem.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so I've made a circle on this map, and the circle goes from Madagascar off the coast of East Africa, and it goes up to Borneo, because not only do you speak languages of the same family as the people in Madagascar, but the languages spoken in Madagascar, the closest languages to those languages are languages that are spoken in Borneo. They're spoken on the Kalimantan side, but they are there are languages from Borneo. So there's a special connection between you and your island and the island of Madagascar, just off the coast of East Africa. So look at that distance. We're talking about thousands of kilometers. And it wasn't the Javanese, it wasn't the Sumatrans, whose languages are the ones that we find in Madagascar. They are Bornean languages from Borneo. Okay, and we were just talking about language diversity, and we know that today in Sabah, people speak many languages. So any individual is probably speaking 2 or 3 different languages, some 4 or 5. And this is not something that's new, this is something that's very old. If you go back, it was very common for people from one language group to marry people from another language group. In some places, people had to marry people from outside their group. That was a custom that people had in different parts of the world. This was the case in places like West Africa. Okay, so here we see a case in West Africa where you had where you have a child growing up where their mother's language might be one language, the father's language might be another language, but then when the child goes to the market, they have to learn another language to speak in the market. The same thing in the Pacific. So if you go to Papua New Guinea, it's the same thing. Your mother might speak one language, your father might speak another language, but when you go to the market, you have to speak another language. So it's very common for children to speak 3, 4, 5 languages before the Europeans got there, before colonialism. And and it was the same here, it was the same there in Sabah. So maybe your mother spoke some variety of Dusun, maybe your father spoke some variety of Murut. Okay, so you grew up speaking both of those languages, but then when you went to the market, maybe you had to speak some form of Malayo. Okay, and that's before the English got here. When the English got here, what happened? Well, you just add another language to the languages you already speak. Okay, so this is a process that's very common among indigenous peoples all over the world. And that's so this idea that the Europeans had that before they reached Sabah, the people in Sabah were just living in their small villages and not going anywhere else and not learning other languages and practicing other cultures and adopting many identities. That's a myth. It's not the Europeans that connected the peoples of Southeast Asia. The peoples of Southeast Asia were in contact with each other long before the Europeans got there, even long before the Malayan speakers got there. So we're talking about a tradition that goes way back. We're talking about traditions that go as far back as 40 to 50,000 years. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about linguistics. Okay, today, linguists tell us that there are at least 6,000 different languages spoken in the world. Okay, now let's think about what that means. First of all, we know that many languages were spoken before colonialism, before the Europeans invaded the rest of the world. There were many more languages being spoken. There are some languages that have died out since the Europeans reached places like Sabah. You can see right in front of our eyes some of the indigenous languages of Sabah having fewer and fewer speakers. And some of you are doing really good work in trying to bring those languages back. But we know that some of them have already been lost. So before the Europeans got to Sabah, before the Europeans started to expand, to establish their empires, there were many more than 6,000 languages. But today we still have 6,000. So what does that mean? Well, each language is a different way of speaking, but it's not just a different way of speaking. It also represents a different way of thinking. When a language dies, a way of understanding the world dies with it. So according to the language you speak, you look at the world differently. In other words, just as every individual has a different experience and sees the truth from a different angle, each language also sees the truth from a different angle. And we need each other's languages as well to understand, gain a greater understanding of what we see as the truth. Okay, so each one of those languages then is not just a different set of ways of speaking, but also a different set of ways of thinking and a different set of ways of acting in the world, a different set of ways of understanding. So that means that right now we have, in the world today, we have at least 6,000 different ways of understanding the world. 6,000 different ways of thinking, 6,000 different ways of acting in the world. Okay, so What does that mean in terms of what we're supposed to be talking about today? Today, we're supposed to be talking about economics. We're supposed to be talking about politics. So if there are 6,000 different ways, at least 6,000 different ways of understanding the world, that must mean there are 6,000, at least 6,000 different economies in the world. Understandings of economy, understandings of how you will manage your house and your family and the land around your house that gives you life. So there are 6,000 different economies as well. And if there are 6,000 different economies, that means there's 6,000 different politics as well. So in other words, with each one of those indigenous languages, you have a different set of politics and a different set of economies. Imagine the diversity, the richness of that diversity. Imagine how many answers to so many of our questions can be found in that great diversity. Imagine how many cures, how many medicines that can help to cure some of our economic illnesses, some of our political illnesses could be found in that great diversity. But just like the diversity in our forests, much of that diversity is dying. And with it are dying some of the possible solutions to some of the biggest problems that we're having, the economic problems of the world, the environmental problems of the world, the political problems of the world, problems that have to do with how we resolve conflicts in our communities. So this is what we're talking about here. So we're talking about a great diversity of economies. That means a great diversity in the ways in which people use their customs to manage their immediate surroundings, that is their house, but also to manage relations in their communities, economics and politics. So if we, let's look at some examples now of how some of those different economies work. Well, these people in this picture are from Tanna Island in Papua New Guinea, in the mountains, in the highlands of Papua New Guinea. And there, every year, they do a big festival where they exchange taro for yams. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But when they do that exchange, what happens in terms of politics? What happens in terms of economics in their village? What happens is the networks, the relationships between people are strengthened because everybody contributes to the exchange. So what they do is everybody contributes taro in this village, and when they get enough taro, they exchange it for yams that are grown in another village. So in terms of that one village, the economy of that one village, the relationships, the economic relationships between everybody in that village are strengthened. It's an economy, it's a circular economy that seeks life, that strengthens life-seeking relationships between people. But it goes further than that. There's a political dimension because it's not just about trading goods. It's also about cementing relationships, and relationships are always political. And it's not just the relationships in the village itself, it's the relationships between villages, so that villages don't have if there are conflicts between villages, when you have the exchange, those conflicts are resolved. It's a way to prevent conflict. It's a way to prevent wars. Okay, it's a way to prevent the kind of things that seek death. It's a way to seek life instead of death. So some people say that in Melanesia, people fight with food instead of fighting with arms. Okay, and I think that's a much better way to fight. If you're going to fight, okay, fight with food. So see who can give more food to the other person. So if I give you more food, then you have to see if you can try to give me more food than I gave to you. So we compete in that way. We compete in a way that gives life to both of us, instead of competing to see who can kill the other person, or who can damage the other person, or who can seek death for the other person. So let's have more food fights and less armed conflicts. Okay, another example of an economy that does the similar kind of thing, but across islands, is the one that I was just talking about before that happens in the Trobriand Islands. They have a trading system called the Kula trading system, and it goes from island to island. And like we were talking about before, they don't just trade goods, they trade beads, they trade stories. This is what Ilan was talking about, the tamu. The tamu is not just about trading rice and fish. It's also about trading stories. It's also about people falling in love with each other and becoming partners. Somebody from one village and another village, starting a family together. It could be people talking about the politics of bringing everybody together to do something big. In other words, when they need people in many villages to cooperate to do something that will benefit everybody. And all of your ancestors were able to do this. Okay, so people from different villages, people from different communities cooperated with each other. They didn't need to have a government program to do it. They didn't need to have a politician to organize them. They had, when they needed to, they cooperated with each other. It didn't mean that one had to take over. Everybody worked together, but they did so without one person bossing the other. And here we're talking now about leadership. Leadership that is not about a linear form of leadership where one person is at the top, bossing everybody else around. No, it's a kind of circular model for leadership where the leader is in the middle. The leader is a person who has shown that they have the capacity to listen to everybody. They listen more than they speak. And they act. And when they act on behalf of everybody. They find a way to bring everybody's interests together and find a way for the whole community to work together in the interests of everybody, not just in the interest of one person. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So we're talking about micro linkages inside of families, inside of villages. We're also talking about macro linkages from village to village or from island to island. And as we saw from our map, these linkages can go extremely far. They can cross thousands of kilometers. Okay, now let's look at what anthropologists are telling us. Well, anthropologists are telling us that we have been on this earth as human beings for at least a few 100,000 years, but probably up to 1 million or even 2 million years. Now, different anthropologists give us different numbers, but it's at least a few 100,000 years. That's a long, long, long time. Okay, now we know that during those few 100,000 years, most of our ancestors were living here on this planet for most of that time with this great diversity that we just were talking about, a diversity of languages, a diversity of cultures, a diversity of economies, a diversity of politics, a diversity of sciences, a diversity of ways of looking at the world, understanding the world, of reading the world, of writing the world. But even though there was all that diversity, even though there were at least 6,000 different ways of speaking, 6,000 different ways of thinking, 6,000 different ways of acting, there were some things that were, that all of those different 6,000 different cultures and peoples and societies, there were some things that they all shared. And these were the things that guaranteed that they were able to survive over those few 100,000 years. It wasn't just by accident. The reason why they survived over those few 100,000 years is because they realized certain things that are basic to making sure that you survive, that your family survives, that your community survives. And one of the things that all of these different cultures share, all indigenous cultures share, is that even though you have different economies, even though you have different politics or different sciences, all of those economies, all of those different sciences, all of those different politics have a particular goal. And that goal is fulfillment, fulfilling the needs of all of the members of the family and fulfilling the needs of all of the members of the community. And this is what we mean by circular economics and circular politics. Now we're taking that restricted academic university definition of circular economics, and we're adding new dimensions to it. There's a purpose to it. And the purpose is not just about protecting the environment. It's about protecting society. It's about making sure that everybody's needs are fulfilled. And fulfillment isn't just about gratification. Gratification is like what happens right now. You drink Coca-Cola and you feel gratification for a moment before you start feeling empty again and you start feeling needy again, and then you need to drink another Coca-Cola. That's gratification. That's addiction. We're not talking about gratification. We are talking about fulfillment. What really satisfies you when you drink a coconut, that really satisfies you. You drink a coconut, you're no longer thirsty. You don't find yourself needing to drink another coconut for a long time. You can go to your garden, you can go fishing, and you can stay out there for 2 or 3 hours just off of one coconut. Okay, that's real fulfillment. And plus, the coconut you get for free. You get the coconut free from your own land, from your own economy. You don't have to buy it. But of course, Coca-Cola has to be bought. And to buy something at the store, you need money. And in order to get money, you have to sell your labor like a slave to somebody else. And that other person will take most of the value for your labor and put it in their pocket and just give you a little bit of money so you can go to the store and buy Coca-Cola. But when you buy Coca-Cola, the money you give to the people in the store goes back to the same people who stole your labor. So they collect from you from both sides. Okay, so fulfillment, what do we mean? Okay, well, and this connects with development because you know, when you first learned about development, they promised you that development will satisfy the needs of everybody. That's the promise they made. They even promised us that we would be fulfilled by development. Now, I don't even use the word development very much anymore because I don't believe in those promises. Those promises are really have proved to be lies. But let's just, for a minute, step back and think about that. Development. The promise they make when they talk about development. And they say, okay, we have two kinds of countries, developed countries and developing countries. Think about what that means. Okay, in other words, this is the same, is this the same or different from when the British came and they said that they were civilized and you were not civilized? What's the difference between saying a country like America is a developed country and a country like Sabah is an undeveloped or developing country, and saying that a country like the US is civilized and a country like Sabah is not civilized? So basically, they're changing the words they're using, but they're still repeating the same colonial ideas. In other words, they used to say that they were Christians and everybody else was pagans. And then they switched their terminology to, oh, Europeans are civilized, everybody else is uncivilized. But then that went out of style, out of fashion. And now they say, oh, Europeans are developed and non-Europeans are developing. But it's the same idea that only they have the truth. Only they have the true life, the good life. Everybody else doesn't. Okay, and so that, and then we'll see what happens when they make people believe that the good life the truth is over there and not here. Because when you believe that the truth is over there, when you believe that what's good is over there and not here, then you believe that power is not here with you. Power is over there. And when you believe power is over there, what happens? You are domesticated. Okay, so when we think of developed countries, one of the first countries that comes to mind is the USA. Okay, and when we think of undeveloped countries, one of the last ones on all the list is Vanuatu, which is one of the countries where I work with indigenous peoples. Okay, well, let's look at it now. Let's look at the life of the people in the USA and the people in Vanuatu. Okay, in Vanuatu, the majority of the people still have their sovereign power. They have not been domesticated. 90% of the land of Vanuatu is under traditional custom law. In other words, the state law does not apply to 90% of the land in Vanuatu. That means that everybody in Vanuatu has access to land. In other words, there are no landless people in Vanuatu. What happens when you're not landless? Well, if you have access to land, that means you can always grow your own food. If you don't have money to buy it in the store, you have the land to grow it. That means the people in Vanuatu have 100% food security. And when we're talking about work, okay, if you have land, that means that you will always have work. There's always work to do on the land. So the people in Vanuatu have 100% job security. And then when you need a house, what happens? Well, people in Vanuatu still have strong communities. That's part of their indigenous customary life. So if you need a house, the young people in the village all go out to the forest, they cut whatever you need to make your house with, and everybody builds your house together. So the people in Vanuatu also have 100% housing security. And then if you have children in the village, you know that somebody will always be able to take care of your children when you cannot take care of them. If you need to do something, you know that you will have the whole village to take care of your children. And you know that when you get older, the whole village will take care of you. That means that people have 100% social security too. If you have all this security, you live without fear. You live in an environment where nobody steals because everybody has enough. You don't have to worry about somebody taking something because everybody is sharing, and also everybody has enough. Everybody has enough to eat. Everybody has a place to sleep. Everybody has a job. Everybody has a house. Everybody has land. Okay, so, and this is what you get when you have a circular economy, but a circular economy, not just in the university sense, in the academic sense or the Western sense, but a circular economy in the sense of what everybody in Sabah had until before colonization, and what the people in Vanuatu still have. Okay, but they call Vanuatu an underdeveloped country or an undeveloped country or a developing country, and they call the US a developed country. But let's go to the US for a minute. In the US, people don't have power. The land of the US is all under state control, except for some very few small places where indigenous people have little reservations. But it's always the worst land where you can't grow anything. Okay, that's where the United States has put its indigenous peoples. So the majority, the great majority of the people in the US do not have the land to grow their own food. If you have a house in the US, chances are you'll have there's a very small amount of land around it, not enough to grow a garden to feed your family or feed yourself even. In the US, there is unemployment, 13 million people. officially are jobless in the US, but that is an underestimate. That's the official government figure. But if you look at the actual number of people who don't have work, it's at least double that, 25 million, something like that. But everybody in Vanuatu has work. Okay, in the US, right now, there are 50 million people with no food security. They have food insecurity. That means sometimes they go to bed hungry. They don't have enough to eat during the day. 50 million people. But in Vanuatu, in a traditional indigenous village in Vanuatu, everybody has enough to eat. There's no hunger in Vanuatu. In the US, there are 1 million people who are homeless. But in Vanuatu, everybody has a house. In the US, 31 million people have no health insurance. So if you get sick, there's a good chance you're going to die because you can't get medical care in the United States of America. But in Vanuatu, you have complete social security. There's somebody in the village who will always take care of you and who knows about all of the plants that are medicinal to cure your diseases. So why do we call the US a developed country and Vanuatu an undeveloped country or a developing country? If development is about satisfaction of needs, if development is about fulfillment, then Vanuatu is a far more developed country than the United States is. But where does Vanuatu's development come from? Where does its very advanced level of development come from? It doesn't come from the West. It doesn't come from the linear economy. It doesn't come from the economics of mining. It doesn't come from a politics of invasion. It comes from a circular politics, a circular economy. This is the level of development that all of our ancestors had, but that we don't give ourselves permission to see. When we think of how our ancestors lived, we often think that, oh, they lived in a backward society where everybody was hungry and people were insecure and everybody was fighting each other and nobody took care of anybody else. This is what we are told by colonial thinking and the colonial textbooks that we read in the school. But when you go to Vanuatu, you go to a village that is still living this life, this traditional life of 40,000 years ago, you'll see a high level of development, a high level of fulfillment at so many different levels. And it's not just about land and jobs and food and housing and medicine. It's also about spirituality. It's also about peace of mind, people living without fear. And when you're living without fear, if somebody comes from the outside, you don't have to be afraid of them. So if you go to Vanuatu today and you stay in there in a village for 1 or 2 weeks, somebody will probably come up to you and say, look, here's some place in our village where nobody has a garden, okay? Let our young people build you a house. Come live with us. You can make your garden with us and you can live with us. See how open you can be if you have this kind of security. But so when we say that indigenous peoples were open people, that they allowed people from other places to come and live with them, that they went to other places to live with other people, that they practiced each other's cultures, that they learned each other's languages. This is what we mean. We mean that that openness is an openness that comes from security. Go to the United States and you see how fearful people are and how people are so fearful of immigrants coming into the country. In Europe and the US now, there are terrible, terrible things being done to immigrants. People are afraid that they're going to take their jobs. So you see what happens when people live with that level of insecurity. They begin to fear. They begin to close themselves down. So the real people who are living in closed societies and not opening themselves to anybody else are the people of Europe and the people of the United States. those are probably the most closed people in the world, the most fearful people in the world, the most insecure people in the world, and the ones who are the least open to others coming to live with them, the least open to learning other people's languages, the least open to learning from other people, and the most blind to what other people have to teach them about how they could do things in a different way, in a way that respected human societies, respected the natural environment, respected or worked for the benefit of all and the fulfillment of all, instead of just a few rich people. So we have also in the universities people who count and rank different countries, not just by development, but also by happiness index. So the World Environment Forum has what they call the World Happiness Index. And surprise, surprise, look at the countries that they list as the first 5 countries: Denmark, Switzerland, Iceland, Norway, Finland. These are supposedly the happiest countries in the world. But this is happiness based on linear economies. Which are the countries that have the most money? But I ask you, do you know anybody whose life has been fulfilled by money or what money can buy? Think about it. If you look at people who steal, who are the people who steal the most? Okay, people who have, poor people who are poor, maybe steal a loaf of bread, maybe steal something small. But when we talk about the people who steal millions and millions and millions, sometimes you read in the newspapers, this person stole 20 million from the government. Who are these people? These are not poor people who steal like that. These are the richest people. These are the business people who do this type of corruption. These are politicians who already have big salaries. Why are they stealing? If money was supposed to satisfy us, why is it that the richest people who have the most money still are stealing, still are so hungry for more money that they're stealing it? That's proof that money has never satisfied anybody. It never fulfilled anybody. It just buys you more and more addictive stuff and makes you more and more addictive and more hungry to get more and more money. It doesn't satisfy anything. So why are they listing these countries at the top? Now we have another index called the Happy Planet Index that measures different things. It doesn't measure the linear economy, it measures the circular economy. And look at the countries that are at the top of the Happy Planet Index. Vanuatu is number 4 up there. And you'll see all of these countries. These are all countries that have lots of indigenous people in them. Costa Rica, Mexico, Colombia, Vanuatu, and Vietnam too. Vietnam has lots of indigenous people too. Okay, so basically, when you start to look at real fulfillment and real development that really satisfies people, really guarantees that people have a place to sleep, really guarantees that people have food to eat, really guarantees that people have work to do, really guarantees that people have social security, then the countries that used to be at the bottom all of a sudden get to the top, and the countries that used to be on the top go to the bottom. And in Vanuatu, I don't know if you've done this in Sabah yet, but people are working on alternative indicators for well-being. So there's a group of people who have decided to try to measure well-being in Vanuatu, fulfillment in Vanuatu, happiness in Vanuatu, according to things like access to land to make a garden, access to people in the community who can take care of their children, access to people in their community who can take care of them when they get old. All of these kinds of things that really satisfy people, that guarantee well-being, that guarantee fulfillment in life. Just to check, can everybody still hear me, and can everybody see the slides, and are the subtitles working? Just a reality check, because I can't see.
No problem, no problem.
Great, okay. Now, So we already saw that there are at least 6,000 ways of excuse me, I'm going to stop this. Okay, yeah, I'm turning off my phone, sorry. Okay, yeah, we've already seen that there are 6,000 different ways of organizing society. There are 6,000 ways of doing economy. There are 6,000 ways of doing politics, at least 6,000 ways. We also know that it was many more before colonization. Maybe there were 20,000 different ways. But right now there are 6,000. Okay, on top of that, we know that we as human beings have been on this planet for at least a few 100,000 years. But we also know from archaeology, we also know from linguistics that it's only quite recently, just the last 10 or 15,000 years ago, and only in a few cultures, out of those 6,000 different cultures, those 6,000 different civilizations, only a few of them decided to go the other road, decided to establish linear economies. For the vast majority of human history, for most of those 100,000 years, everybody was living in a circular economy. The linear economy is very recent in human history. It's only the last 10 to 15,000 years in a couple of places like maybe India or China or the Middle East. Okay, but the problem is, of course, that linear economies are based on conquest and invasion. So these linear economies, these linear societies began to conquer the rest of the world, and they spread like cancers. Okay, but we're talking about only a few societies among the 6,000 different ones, and we're talking about only the last few thousand years. Yet when we read our history books, they say, oh, well, maybe it's too bad that there are rich people and poor people, but that's just the way it always was, the way it is, and the way it always will be. But that's a lie. Most of our ancestors lived without rich people and poor people. Everybody needs were satisfied. Everybody was fulfilled. Okay, how did they manage it? How did all those different indigenous peoples, societies, manage to survive, and not just survive, but thrive with fulfillment and satisfaction for several 100,000 years before colonization? Okay, we said there was great diversity. People spoke many different languages. People practiced many different politics and economies. But underneath all that diversity, there were some things that they shared, some things that they all realized they needed to do in order to meet everybody's needs. Okay, number one, they realized that they needed to respect nature and work with nature. So even though you have all this diversity in all the different parts of the world, all indigenous peoples share this idea that nature must be respected. And if you change things, if you invent a new technology, or you make a new scientific discovery, you have to make sure that that discovery, that technology, works with nature instead of against nature. Number two, another thing that all of these different diverse groups of people shared, they realized that they would survive the best if everything that they were able to gather and produce, they shared with everybody else, so that nobody was hungry, nobody was homeless. Okay, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about a circular economy that makes sure that everybody's needs are satisfied. Number three, that nobody is superior to anybody else. That is, there's no, that they realize that men cannot be made to feel that they are superior to women, or one group in society feels like it's better than somebody else. Those are politics of corruption. Those are the politics of patronage. And you don't find them in traditional indigenous societies. In traditional indigenous societies, everybody has power. Everybody has a voice. Everybody plays a part in society. Everybody is recognized as a valuable member of society, and nobody is seen as inferior to anybody else. Even leaders are treated just like everybody else. In fact, sometimes leaders have to work harder than everybody else because it's their job to serve the community. This is what we mean by indigenous leadership being true public service, not the fake public servants that we see in the politics of patronage, in the linear economy and the linear politics that have come with colonialism. And also, those 6,000 different societies were able to survive for hundreds of thousands of years because also they learned that the more they traded with other communities, the more they intermarried with other communities, the more they learned other languages, the more they let other people come and live with them and went to live with other people, the more they learned about each other's technologies and sciences, the better it was for everybody. Everybody learned from each other and everybody stayed up to date on the latest ways to make life better for everybody. So just like our brother was telling us about chickens and bananas, okay? These were things that come from Borneo, but that the people of Borneo shared with the rest of the world. And the people from the rest of the world were not afraid to take these things because they realized that by sharing across islands, across regions, they could make life better for everybody and fulfill everybody's needs and satisfy everybody's needs. And of course, women play a particularly important role in this, even up until today. So in our lives today, many markets in West Africa and other parts of the world. And I think this is what something that Ilan was talking about last night too. When we're talking about Tamu, women play a very important role in those marketplaces. And it's important that women play that kind of role because when money goes into the hands of women, it is distributed through the family and through the community to everybody. Everybody benefits. So we're talking about a circular economy and how women play a major role in that because women have been less colonized in many ways than men. When colonization comes in, their patronage system involves men first. So men are the first ones who are made to work on the plantations. All of the traditional work that men do, they tell the men to give those to the women. And then that frees up the men to work as labor on the plantations. Men get money for working on the plantations, and then they make sure that there's alcohol for the men to buy in the evening. So all of the money they made goes back to the plantation owner and doesn't go back to their families and their communities. So when we're talking about the linear economy, it's part of a corruption. It's part of a politics of patronage that affects men more deeply than women when we're talking about the European colonial system. Okay, so what this means is all of those different 6,000 or even more than 6,000 different societies all had circular sciences that respect and work with nature. They all have circular economies where whatever one person produces is shared with everybody else. They have circular politics where men don't see themselves as better than women, or one group in society doesn't see itself as better than another group. Everybody works together as a team to carry out community projects, but also to solve community problems and to solve conflicts. And when conflict, and it's a society where everybody wins and nobody loses. We'll look at that in a minute. So when conflicts are resolved, they're resolved in such a way that at the end, everybody shakes hands. If I do something wrong to you, in the linear system, you take me to court, I go to jail. If I go to jail, that does not solve any problem. It doesn't solve your problem, it doesn't solve my problem. It just makes more problems. But in traditional societies, when there's a problem in society, if I do something wrong to you, then we sit down. We solve the problem in a circular way. We sit down, we discuss it, we figure out what happened. And then when people realize that I did something wrong, I say, I'm sorry. I give you a present or compensation. Then we shake hands and we forget that it ever happened. That's real conflict resolution. That's conflict resolution that seeks life and doesn't seek death. That's a kind of conflict resolution that will bring about harmony and peace between people instead of war and conflict. See how much indigenous people have to teach people in Europe, have to teach people in the US. But of course, the people in the US believe that they know everything and they have nothing to learn from anybody else. And then also, all of these different people had a circular exchange networks, okay, where they intermarried with other people, et cetera, the things that we've already talked about. Okay, so here we see the example that we talked about before about the taro and the yam exchange. So these people in Nalpaimene community in Tana Island, okay, in Vanuatu, every year, they construct what they call a boat, but they're living in the middle of the island where there's no water to sail on, but they construct a boat. Why do they call it a boat? Because it's something that connects them with their neighbors. So these people, their custom is to grow taro. So every year they take 42,000 taro roots, 42,000. And they build this boat. They're building the boat right there in the picture. And in the other village, they're doing the same thing with 42,000 yams. And what happens is they have a ceremony, and this village brings their 42,000 taro to the other village, and the other village brings their 42,000 yams to this village. So instead of fighting each other with arms and killing each other, they fight with food. Okay, but what happens 10 to 15,000 years ago? Okay, as we said, very recently in human history, we're not talking about a long time ago, we're talking about only 10 to 15,000 years ago. Before that, all of our ancestors were living in settlements without walls. There was no invasion. There was no arms. People were living with the kind of circular sciences and circular politics and circular economics and circular trade networks that we were just talking about. But something happens about 15,000 years ago. And it doesn't happen on all those 6,000 or more than 6,000 different societies. It happens in only a few societies, a few sick societies. A few societies become sick and they adopt a linear economy, so that they change. They change. The goal of their science, the goal of their economics, the goal of their politics, and the goal of their exchange networks shifts. It changes. Before, it was about fulfilling the manageable and limited needs of all the members of their community. In other words, before it was a circular economics and a circular politics. But in these few societies, they changed it from fulfilling everybody's needs to feeding the unmanageable and unlimited greed of a few privileged members of the society. And that's when we get linear economics and linear politics. Instead of providing for everybody's needs and satisfying for everybody's needs, these societies shift to feeding just a few people's greed at the expense of everybody else. So now the great majority is no longer having their needs fulfilled. They're no longer having their needs satisfied because a few people are so greedy that they take everything else that used to satisfy the needs of everybody else. Okay, so basically, this is what the Europeans brought to Sabah. This is what the company brought. So when Ilan was talking about the CEO of the company and the company that took over Sabah, when the English came, this is what they brought to Sabah. But it had come earlier too, in the form of the kind of economics some of the sultanates brought to Borneo as a whole, to North Borneo in particular. So it's something that happened in several waves in Borneo, but it came in a major way when the British got here. Okay, now what happens when you follow a line? What happens when you replace the circle? Okay, here we have a circle. Okay, in this circle, who's boss? Everybody. Who works? Everybody. Who eats? Everybody. But when you replace the circle for a linear economy, then it's each person for themselves. It's like they're in a race. And when you're in a race, only one person wins. And what happens to the person who wins? They go to the top. And what happens to everybody else? They fall to the bottom. So now these people have to work hard, not to satisfy the needs of themselves and their families and their community. They have to work hard now to satisfy the greed of this one person at the top. And this one person at the top becomes wealthier and wealthier and wealthier, becomes richer and richer and richer with money, which allows them to begin to corrupt some people to do their work for them, to make sure that all of these people at the bottom remain enslaved, remain domesticated. Okay, so in other words, this is how you move from a circle system to a linear system, or a triangle pyramid system. Okay, and this is the system that the Europeans brought when they colonized Sabah. But all of our ancestors used to live in this kind of system. Now, at the end of the last session, we talked about people who may no longer be living in an indigenous setting, that maybe you're living in town. Okay, well, how do you raise your children successfully? How do you feed yourself? How do you survive? It's by reestablishing this type of economy, reestablishing this type of politics in your own networks, in your own house, in your own community. You do it. We still do it. Every day we do it. But and where do we get the knowledge to do that? These are the things that have been passed on from our ancestors. But we don't give our ancestors credit for that. And we don't even give ourselves credit for that. Well, as we said before, these are just the things I do to survive. But no, there's a lot of knowledge behind there, and there's a lot of history behind there. Okay, so what's the result? We get this great big pyramid. Okay, this is the linear system. So it's each person for themselves, and you're not competing in a race to see who can run the fastest. The race is not about who can run the fastest. Don't think that the person who gets to the top is the one with the most talent. That's not the case. The person who gets to the top is the person who's able to steal from everybody else. The person who steals the most gets to the top. So this is not a race to see whose legs are the strongest. This is a race to see who can steal more than everybody else, who can manage to enslave everybody else, to steal their labor and to steal their land. So the biggest thieves get to the top. So if you look at the kings and queens of Europe, who are those kings and queens? Those were the thieves. Those are the robber barons. Those are the people who used to go around the countryside, robbing people, and then making people pay them to protect them from the other robbers, until some robbers moved up until they became so powerful and so wealthy that they could establish themselves as nobles that enslaved everybody else, that stole everybody else's labor and land. And those nobles became the kings and queens. So when you see the picture of the queen or a picture of a king, you're seeing the picture of the person who won the contest to see who could steal more from everybody else, the biggest thieves. Okay, but the thieves, the people who run the show, have people who do their work for them. And now this is where we start talking about the politics of patronage, the politics of corruption. So the vast majority of the people are down here. They work hard, but their hard work fills up the pockets of these wealthy people, these people at the top, but in exchange, the wealthy people just give them a very small amount back. And then when you get that small amount in your hand, you go to the store, and even that small amount that they give you goes back to their hands when you buy something in the store. So they're always promising you that they are going to satisfy you. Their system is going to satisfy you. It's going to fulfill you, but it never really does. It's like they're riding your back, stealing your labor, stealing your land, promising you a loaf of bread, but it's just a little bit beyond your reach. I'm going to be talking about one level, a special level that we call symbolic elites. Okay, we talked about that a little bit before, but let's talk about it a little bit more, because last night Ilan was talking about the administration. Ilan was talking about the scientists. And this is where we are right here. Okay, what do we do? What's our job? Our job is to convince everybody else that they don't know what's good, that they don't know what's true, that only we know what's good and true, only we know what's normal. And they have to accept what we tell them is normal, what we tell them is good, what we tell them is the truth. So when you want to know the truth, where do you go? You go to the professor, and the professor is going to tell you the truth, because the professor knows science. And science is the only way to know the truth. But what kind of science is that? That's only one of 6,000 different sciences. And it's an especially blind science that can't see 95% of what's out there. But we pretend in the universities, we professors, we pretend that we know everything, that we know the whole truth. And you have to come to us if you want to know what the truth is. And it's the same with religious people. So we have priests and imams who pretend to know what's true and what's good. And when you want to know what a good life is, you can't figure that out for yourself. You have to go ask them, and they have to tell you what's good, rather than you using your own power, your own sovereignty, your own mind, your own science, your own understanding of what's true and good to figure it out for yourself. So in other words, why do the universities look like churches? Because our work as academics came from the work that the monks and the priests used to do, which is convince the people that they don't know what's good, that they don't know what's true. They need somebody else to tell them what's good and true. But when we tell you what's good and what's true, it's a version of good and a version of truth and a version of what's normal. That is the version that fits the agenda of the people in control, the ruling class. So the truth that we tell you is truth according to what keeps them in power, what keeps them in a position where they can steal your land and steal your labor. When we tell you what's good, it's not what's good for you, it's what's good for them. In other words, an idea of goodness, an idea of normalcy that corresponds to what's going to keep them in power. And when we talk about the truth, when we talk about what's good, when we talk about what's normal, it's usually patriarchy. It's usually ethnocentrism. It's usually plunder, okay? And what do we mean by patriarchy? It's usually a kind of corruption. It's a kind of patronage where we try to convince men that it's normal for them to treat women like they're slaves. We try to we try to convince men that they are good and women are evil. So all of these things that we say, that men, that there's something wrong about women. Women need to be controlled by men. Women need to to be improved by men. Okay, so we have all of these ideas that come with patriarchy. But it's not just about patriarchy, it's also about ethnocentrism. So we take one group of people in society, one ethnic group, and we put them above another ethnic group. And we corrupt them. We give them patronage. We give them a little bit of our wealth. We share a little bit of our wealth with them to convince them that they're better than the other group. And then we use them as our police to make sure that those people never unite against us. These people keep society under control for us, the ruling class. But if you look at all these different levels, who is happy? Is anybody happy? Whose needs are being served really? Are anybody's needs really being served? Because just like we said before, who are the people who steal more than everybody else? It's the rich people. So is all that money making them happy? No. Money serves nobody. Money serves itself. And this whole pyramid is just a pyramid scheme. It doesn't satisfy anybody. It's an illusion. It's a game. It's a pyramid game. And the only thing that money serves is money itself. It doesn't make anybody happy. It doesn't really satisfy anybody's needs. It just gives you momentary gratification and addiction. Okay, so this is another thing. If you want to see miserable people, if you want to see unhappy people, go to the United States. There are miserable people, unhappy people in the United States. Even though they have money, they're killing themselves, committing suicide. They're doing terrible things to other people every day. Why? Because they're living in a system where they believe that something is going to satisfy them, money, but it never really satisfies them. Okay, so what happens in these few societies that go the linear way? Their circular sciences are replaced by linear sciences that plunder nature and work against nature. Their circular economies are replaced by linear economies, where now everybody's labor goes to serve the greed of a few rather than to satisfy the needs of everybody. Their circular politics are replaced by linear politics, full of corruption, full of patronage, full of trying to convince one person they're better than another person. And their circular exchange networks, where they used to trade with other people, and they used to share with other people. They used to marry other people. They used to learn each other's language. They used to learn each other's customs. They used to learn each other's sciences. That gets replaced by imperialism. So now, instead of going to live with other people so you can learn from them, you go to other people's places to conquer them, invade them, impose your language on them, impose your culture on them, impose your science on them, impose your politics on them. And that's what the British did when they got here. They got to Sabah. Yeah, so basically a circular economy seeks life and works with nature. Okay, and it works for everybody's benefit. So that when people work, it's to satisfy and fulfill the needs of everybody in the society. But unfortunately, the colonial linear economics is actually destroying the earth. This is a mine in Papua New Guinea. This used to be a mountain with trees. This used to be a mountain that gave people life. But now it's a pile of poisonous rubble from a mine that is giving the people of the island death. This is the island of Bougainville. And it's not only poisoning their water and giving them death from the water, it's poisoning their fish, and people who eat the fish are dying. But also, when people tried to stop the mine, it created a war, a civil war, where 20,000 people died. So it's death. It seeks death on many different levels. And then what does it produce? What does all this mining produce? What does all this stealing from nature produce? It produces commodities. So you go to the supermarket and you see all these shiny packages, And it looks like, oh, all of this wonderful stuff that's going to satisfy my needs. But then when you read the package, you see what's in there. Almost everything, chemicals and fat, not good kinds of fat, bad kinds of fat, like grease from animals or palm oil that has been hydrogenated. Okay, and so in other words, when you buy something from the store, chances are it's going to have sugar, salt, chemicals for coloring and flavoring, and fat. Well, is it an accident that in the past in Sabah, very few people had diabetes, but today lots of people have diabetes? Is it an accident, or does it come from these commodities? Is it an accident that before in Sabah, very few people had heart attacks, but now many people have heart attacks? It's not an accident. It's because of the result of this economy. People are no longer eating food from the garden, their own gardens, people are eating food from the store. And we know that heart attack comes from eating too much of the wrong kind of greasy food. We know that diabetes comes from all that sugar in all these foods in the store. And is it an accident that so many people in Sabah are now dying of high blood pressure and getting stroke? No, because we also know that that people are no longer eating food from the garden. They're eating so much food from the store that has so much salt in it, so much salt that it's giving them strokes. And is it an accident that people in Sabah are now dying from cancer when their ancestors didn't used to die from cancer? It's not an accident, because all of these things that we buy in the store are full of chemicals, chemicals to preserve them, chemicals to color them, chemicals to give them addictive kind of flavor, so that you keep wanting to buy more and more and more and more and more, and consume more and more, eat more and more and more. And all these products in the store, maybe the package of rice says it's just rice in there, but it's not just rice in there. We know that the rice that you buy in the store is filled with pesticide, it's filled with herbicide, it's filled with fertilizer residue, it's filled with all the chemicals that they spray it with when it is in the warehouse, all the chemicals they spray with it when it's in the store to protect it against cockroaches and rats. So again, it's cancer. So basically, that's why we say that linear economies are death-seeking. They're not life-seeking. And they're working against nature, not with nature. Can you hear me now? Okay, now, the idea of colonization, now we've come to that point now. Colonization comes from the replacement of the networks that all of our ancestors had, where people shared across thousands of miles, to colonization, to conquest, to invasion, where one group starts to invade other people in order to steal their land and steal their labor. But when we talk about colonization, usually we talk about people from Europe going to other parts of the world to steal the land and labor of peoples of non-European descent. But it's not just that. In fact, we can talk about colonization, we can talk about at least 3 different colonies. Okay, so it's not just people of non-European descent, people in Sabah, people in Latin America, people in Africa. It's not just people of non-European descent who are having their land and their labor stolen from them, but it's also women. Women are being treated just like a colony as well. So women's labor is stolen from them. Who pays women for all the hard work that they do? Who even recognizes all the hard work that women do in the house? That work is just as important as any other work, but is it acknowledged? No, people take it for granted, just like the environment is taken for granted. The environment is always doing incredible work for us every day, but we don't even acknowledge it. That's just what the trees do. The trees live and they just do that, and we get oxygen, and that's great. No, the trees are doing work for us. Women are doing work for us every day, but we don't acknowledge it. We don't pay for it. We just take commodities, we dump on the environment. And when rich countries have a lot of waste, they dump it back on countries in Asia, on countries in Africa, on countries in Latin America. So that's another form of colonization, is dumping. So all that dumping that's done on the environment. So when people go to work in a linear economy, when men go to work in a linear economy, and who takes care of them? The boss has all the money, doesn't take care of them. It's women who have to take care of them. When men get drunk, who beats the women? Who gets beaten? The women get beaten. In other words, the dumping that rich countries do on poor countries, that rich countries do to the environment, that dumping also happens to women. So in many ways, we can consider women and the environment also to be colonies. Okay, so what's the result of all of this? What is the result of the linear economy? What's the result of colonization? We're now living in what we could call a neo-colonial world. Most countries got their independence in Asia. Most countries got their independence in Latin America. Most countries got their independence in Africa in the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s. Some of the last ones were places like Papua New Guinea. Vanuatu got its independence in 1981. Are those countries really independent? Okay, so last night, Ilan said that, yes, Sabah got its independence, but then lost it. It got recolonized. And we could say the same thing has happened to the rest of the world. Okay, so if you look at all the countries that got their independence in the 1960s, 1970s, they've all been recolonized so that their governments are now run by the banks. Their governments were given loans. The loans became debts. And then to pay back those debts, they had to allow the big banks like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, come back into their countries and run their countries. And who's behind those banks? The same old colonial powers, the Netherlands, England, Britain, France, the US, Japan. They're still in control, but now you don't see their faces directly. They're represented by the big banks like the World Bank. And what is the result? Okay, so let's just look at what's happening in the world today. It's much worse than during the colonial era. We are now living in a deeper level of colonization than ever. Colonialism has not gone away. It's actually gotten worse. So the 62 richest people in the world, just 62 people, they have the same amount of wealth as half the world's population put together, 3.6 billion people. In other words, all of the wealth shared by half of the people in the world, take all that, put it together, and that's how much wealth is in the hands of just 62 of the richest people in the world. Are we still living colonization or not? Has the colonial system finished, or has it just gotten worse? Okay, since 2010, those 62 million people's wealth was increased by 542 billion US dollars. So since 2010, those people have become $542 billion richer. Whereas the poorest 3.6 billion people of the world, half of the world's population, their wealth, they've lost $1 trillion in wealth over the last 10 years, since 2010. Okay, since the year 2000, There's been generation of more wealth in the world, but only 1% of that new wealth in the world has gone to the bottom half of the world's population. So 3.6 billion people have only got 1% of the new wealth generated in the world by the linear economy. But the top 1%, the richest 1% of the world's population has gotten 50% of the new wealth created in the world since 2000, since the year 2000. And since the year 2000, the average increase in the income of the bottom 10% of the world's population has been $3 per year. That's less than 1 US cent per day. That's the amount their income has increased over the last 20 years, each year. So in other words, this is why we say that in the linear economy, everybody is working not so that we can satisfy our needs, we can fulfill ourselves and our families and our communities, fulfill the needs of our families and our communities. No, we're all working harder and harder and harder and harder every day to make the richest people in the world richer and richer and richer and richer and richer. So if you look at this graph, okay, if you look at this, 80% of the world's population here, it's all in white, let me change my color. Okay, so here is 80% of the world's population, and it controls 5% of the world's wealth. Okay, if we take 90% of the world's population, that's about 10% of the world's wealth. But what about the remaining 90% of the world's wealth? It's in the hands of the top 10% of the world's population. But is it making them happy? Are those rich, super rich people happy? Look at them. Look at Donald Trump. Look at all the other rich people. Are they happy people? No, they're the most corrupt, evil, bad-spirited, insecure, fearful, reactionary, hurtful, damaged people in the world. So who is this system serving? Nobody. Okay, and we've talked about addiction already. So in other words, nobody is getting satisfied. Nobody is getting fulfilled. The people at the top are living from addiction to addiction. They're all addicted. And the people at the top are addicted to expensive things. We at the bottom or in the middle, are addicted to other things. And the people at the bottom are addicted to inexpensive things like Coca-Cola and fast food. We in the middle, we are addicted to maybe automobiles. We may be addicted to watches. And the people at the top are addicted to the stock market. It's all addiction. Nobody's being satisfied. Everybody is just going from one addiction to the other. Everybody is going, is having a moment of gratification, but right afterwards, as soon as that gratification is gone, it's replaced by a greater level of craving and emptiness. There's no fulfillment. People are becoming emptier and emptier and emptier. Okay, if the linear economy is so good at satisfying people's needs as they tell us, why do the countries that have the most linear economies need to go steal from other countries? If their linear economies are supposed to be satisfying them so well. That's the proof that they're not being satisfied. They have linear economies that are not satisfying them, that drive them to go and steal the land and labor of other people because they'll never be satisfied. The linear economy will never satisfy anybody, even though it promises you it will. And then if you go to, and then what about the circular economies? Okay, they tell us that, indigenous people have primitive economies that don't satisfy people's needs. There's something wrong with them. But if circular economies were so bad at satisfying people's needs, why don't you see why don't you see people from Vanuatu going around and colonizing other countries? People from Vanuatu don't need to colonize anybody. They don't need to invade anybody. They don't need to conquer anybody, because they have everything they need. They have 100% job security, 100% food security, 100% housing security, 100% social security. If you have that kind of security, why should you want to conquer anybody? Why should you want to steal anybody else's labor or land? Because you have fulfillment, you have satisfaction. Okay, now Ilan brought up this problem of scientists and academics and priests and religious people and what role we play. Okay, this is the pyramid of the linear economy. And you see the people in the ruling class who steal everybody else's land and labor up here. Then they buy off certain politicians over here. Then you have us, the priests and the teachers and the professors and the scientists, who are responsible for telling everybody else what's good, everybody else what's true, everybody else what's normal. But what we tell them is true and good and normal is what's in the interest of the ruling class, to keep the people on top on top. It's corrupting people, politicians and the symbolic elites, people in the universities. It's a form of corruption. We basically only allow certain people to graduate in our schools. And then we corrupt them. It's a kind of patronage system where we give them a little bit more than everybody else to make sure that they don't serve the people's needs, they serve the ruling class's needs. They serve the needs of the people who pay them. Now, this is where colonization takes on a new force. Because really, in the end, colonization begins in the mind and ends in the mind. And this, I think, is an important point that Ilan was making last night. How do we fight domestication? How do we undo our domestication? It's about reading and writing our lives, as we mentioned this morning. But how do they colonize our minds? Okay, they colonized Sabah first with soldiers. They colonized Sabah first with guns. But then they brought the missionaries, and then they brought the schools, so that the people of Sabah, who used to believe in themselves, who used to believe in their own capacity to determine what's true, to determine what's good, and determine what's normal in life, they convinced the people of Sabah when they went to school and they went to church that no. Only the Europeans know what's really good and know what's really true. They're the ones who know what's really normal. And you have to depend on them to tell you. And so when you accept what they tell you is normal, when you accept what they tell you is good, when you accept what they tell you is true, then you begin to think and speak and act in their interests instead of your interests. So you spend your whole life trying to be who they want you to be instead of what you and your society and your family need you to be. So that's the deepest level of enslavement. And this is the reason why the work that you're doing is so important. Forever Sabah is really, I think, engaging people at this level, is about undoing all these lies that people have been fed about what is true and what is good and what is normal. All of these lies that the religious people, that the universities, that the schools, that the companies, that the fast food, that the watches and the cars are telling people is what's normal, what's good, and what's true. But it's not. instead of deciding what's true and good and normal for you and your family and your community, you accept what they tell you is true and good and normal, and you spend your whole life trying to become what they tell you you should become, but you never quite get there. So you spend your whole life trying to get there, but you can never quite make it. So they do it with language. They set up a standard language, standard English, okay? And they say you have to speak standard English when you go to school, but you're never able to speak standard English because it's a totally artificial language. Nobody speaks standard English. It was designed that way. Nobody can follow all those rules. Nobody can pronounce every word just like it's supposed to be pronounced, like they tell you in the dictionary. And it's designed that way. We academics have designed it that way so that we keep you like a rat running in a wheel, or that guy with the loaf of bread hanging in front of his face. So you're spending your whole life trying to speak the way you think you're supposed to speak, the way we tell you you're supposed to speak, instead of finding your own voice and speaking in your interest, finding your own truth, the truth that corresponds to your interest and your language and your community and your family, instead of the false truth and the false good and the false normal that the colonial forces, and especially the symbolic elites, like the religious institutions and the educational institutions, are trying to convince you is the right way to think and the right way to speak and the right way to act and what's really good and what's really true and really normal. Okay, so I want to end with two people that have taught me a lot. And these people are people who have worked a lot with indigenous people. One is Vandana Shiva. You might know of her. But in any case, here's something that she said. She said, who feeds the world? It is women and small farmers working with biodiversity who are the primary food providers in most of the world. And their small farm systems are more productive than industrial monocultures. Planting multiple crops in a mixture will have low yields of individual crops, but will have higher total output of food. But Western science only looks at yields and defines yields in such a way as to make the food production on small farms by small farmers disappear. We can't see it. We don't allow ourselves to see it. We don't allow ourselves to see how it's not these big mega agribusiness farms that are feeding us. It's still these small gardens, especially gardens run by women, that are really feeding the world. Okay, so she says, I call this blindness to the high productivity of diversity a monoculture of the mind. And I really liked it when Ilan said last night that they're treating us like oil palm. In other words, they're treating us like a plantation of oil palm, and they've replaced all the diversity in our minds with a monoculture. And we all have to speak the same way. We all have to speak the language, the national language. We have to practice the national culture. We have to adopt the national identity. One language, one culture, one colonizing language, one colonizing culture, one colonizing identity. But that culture, that language, that identity is not a culture, a language and identity that serves our interests. It serves the interests of the people who are stealing from us. Okay, she goes on to say, in Java, small farmers cultivate 607 species in their home gardens, just the gardens around their houses. In sub-Saharan Africa, women cultivate as many as 120 different plants in the spaces left along, when the spaces in the plantations. So the women go to work in the plantations, and then in the little spaces between the coffee plants, or the little spaces between the whatever they're growing in the plantation, they grow 120 different plants that they use to feed their families and heal their families. Medicine they use to heal their families, and the food that they feed their families. In other words, they take the little spaces that the plantation managers have left open, and they use those spaces to reproduce, to recreate the circular economies that they have learned they have learned from their indigenous ancestors. And we see this all over the world. So these women are women who live in the capital city of Papua New Guinea, Port Moresby. And so any land in the city that they see doesn't have houses on it, and has is not being used for any particular purpose in the city, these women go and they farm the land. They create their gardens on that land. So they may not be living in their indigenous societies anymore, but that doesn't mean that they can't recreate those economies, those circular economies, even in an urban space. And this gets us back to the last point that we made last night. It doesn't mean a circular economy and indigenous sovereignty doesn't necessarily mean that you're living in an indigenous village and farming indigenous land, or living a very indigenous life. You may be living in a city, you may be working in an office, but that doesn't stop you from right now, right here, changing your life, using all of those clever ways that you figured out to survive, and fusing them with all of those knowledges that your ancestors had about economics, about politics, about networks, about science, about technology, putting it all together and creating new ingenious ways of reestablishing your sovereignty in your life. And to do this, we have the tools of reading and writing life, which we mentioned in our last session, last night. So basically, reading life is figuring out who's in control of the way you're thinking, who's in control of the way you're speaking, who's in control of the way you're acting. And if it's not you, figure out who it is, and then replace all of that thinking in somebody else's interest, all of that speaking in somebody else's interest, all of that acting in somebody else's interest, by with speaking and speaking and acting and thinking in the interest of yourself and your community, reclaiming your sovereignty. And that's what we mean by writing life. We explained that last night. And so even in the middle of a town in West Africa, women are coming together to form markets, to recreate their tamu, even in a place that's not an indigenous space. So you can do it wherever you are. You don't have to wait for anybody else to tell you to do it or to give you permission. You can do it. So indigenous peoples are inviting all of us not to limit our efforts towards social justice to struggles for civil rights and the redistribution of the ownership of wealth. Okay, ownership is important. Rights are important. But when we're talking about sovereignty, we are going beyond ownership. The land in indigenous communities is sovereignly owned or sovereignly looked after by the entire community. It doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to everybody and all of the generations to come and all of the generations that came before. That is real sovereign power, not this little title deed that you get from the lands office that makes you think through a system of corruption, through a system of patronage, that all of a sudden you're a landowner and you're something special. That's an illusion. That's an addiction. Real power comes from, as Ilan said, from your community and going back to that sovereign place in your community. So, if we want to achieve the kind of change that we are looking to achieve, meaningful social justice, we need to go beyond the struggles for rights and ownership and remember, reclaim, and recreate the sovereign powers that all of our ancestors enjoyed. Now, so we don't have to wait for professors, politicians, lawyers, or judges to give us permission. We can start reclaiming our sovereignty right here and right now. thank you very much. If you want more materials on this, if you want copies of this PowerPoint or other PowerPoints that have to do with this, if you'd like to read more about some of the things that I've been talking about, there's my email address. And if you can't get it now, you can get it through the folks at the Institute. So thank you very, very much. I'll hand it over to the moderators now. As usual, I've probably gone way over time. Oh, sorry about that. But in any case, I'm hoping that next time we meet, we'll be meeting face to face, and this will be a much more interactive experience. But even though it wasn't as interactive as I'd like it to be, I still have learned so much from you, and I know that I have a lot to learn from you in the future.
Thank you, Nick. I think all minds are officially blown. So when Nick is in person, he will be crawling, jumping, lying down, dancing, swinging from the beams. So you can imagine, he now constricted in front of his computer. You must be a little frustrated, but just to give you a sense what it would be like if he came here. So let's talk. Let's have this conversation. And how do we decolonize our minds today, in this moment, right here? So let's hear from everyone. Tell us about your officially blown minds. Share some words.
When talking about reclaiming sovereignty, I suddenly remembered during the early pandemic last year, and suddenly everyone was like sharing, not everyone, but like we can see like the sudden trend of people hanging fruits, hanging extra food on their fences, and then putting up signs like, please take this extra batik, please take this extra papaya, we have them extra in our garden. And then we can see it like in Penampang, in Putatan. And then that made me connect with this presentation today. Like it's automatic in the face of survival, you know. Yeah, baby agrees.
Yeah, baby agrees. I like it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, Noor, that's so important, because like you said, it's automatic. You know, we take it for granted. We don't even you know, we don't give it the acknowledgement and the value that it deserves, because this is the foundation of something that could change the whole society. But for us, it's just, oh, that's just something I did, you know, but really it's something that we can build on. And because people have memories, even though people think, well, I don't speak my language anymore, I don't practice my culture anymore, I don't live in a village anymore, so basically it's all finished and I'm lost. No, you don't realize, but you have so many things that you learned. You learned from your ancestors, through your mother and your father, through the people around you. And many of these knowledges are the knowledges that allow us to do those things to survive. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to survive. So we were taught one way or another things that allow us to survive, and not just to survive, to thrive, to fulfill our needs, in not just in a way that finishes our hunger for things, but also fulfills us in a much deeper way. So those kinds of exchanges where you take something that the abundance of nature, because you respected that fruit tree. That fruit tree gave you back so much abundance, and you couldn't eat it all yourself. You share it with your neighbors, and that to me, that's the foundation that's already there, that we can really build the kind of change that Forever Sabah is looking for and is working for. So a lot of times we do our work and we say, oh, it's going to be so hard, and like, where do we start? Well, those are the places we can start. And in the pandemic, a lot of things have happened, and a lot of people have changed the ways they live in such a way that the things that they do now are more life-seeking rather than death-seeking. A lot of people have moved away from a lot of addictive behaviors that they used to have, and a lot of people are spending more time connecting with their families, connecting with the people around them, connecting with their environments, working in gardens. So there are so many things that are happening also, and it just shows that even with all of this death around us, the pandemic, as a part of the system that seeks death, we can create life. We can survive, and not survive, but thrive in the midst of all of that.
Hi, Nick. I'm Vivian.
Hi.
So honestly, I feel really blessed and thankful for your sharing last night and also today. It really opened up my eyes because just about 2 years ago, I was studying in university, and they didn't taught me things like this. So what I can say is time is not waiting for us. We keep on moving forward without stopping every day. So I think it's very important for us to be humble, stop, and continue to be learning instead of just thinking about ourselves. The world doesn't revolve around us, and we have to see the bigger picture, and we shouldn't throw judgments too early. Yeah, that's what I think. I'm really thankful for this eye-opening experience and your sharing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vivian. And I have to apologize for the universities, because the universities could do so much to support the kind of work that you're doing. But instead, the universities, most of the universities are actually supporting the work of companies to steal more land and steal more labor. And I haven't even begun to talk about intellectual property and how they're taking ideas and turning them into commodities, and using let's see, I think it's yes. In Colombia, when I used to live in Colombia, if we had no other thing, when we're at a particular time when we couldn't afford to buy anything else, we would always buy these cakes of sugar, like the old sugar used to be like a brown cake, and we used to buy that. It's called panela in Spanish, and we would take that and lemongrass and make tea, and that's what we would have all day. And now there's a company that wants to patent panela, which people can't understand. I mean, this is something that everybody always had, and now a company is going to patent it, package it, and then make you buy it and keep you from producing it unless you get permission from that company. So yes, unfortunately, our universities are becoming more and more like businesses, and more like linear economic extractive enterprises. And there are some of us in the university who are trying to do something different, but I think that in fact, I would love my students to be able to go to work with you and see what you are doing. And I'm sure they'd learn much more from you, Vivian, than they would learn from me and in the university. Because what you are doing, like you said, is something is working with people in such a way that you're creating what we were talking about before, these communities of co-learners. Everybody's a learner, everybody's a teacher. And with that, that humbleness that you were talking about. I think that many of my students, many of whom are teachers, could learn so much from that experience. So maybe someday I can bring some of my students to Sabah. Anyway, that's a dream. And when they come, please leave some space in your workday to bring them along and share some of the wonderful things you're doing with them.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Nick. Hi, Nick. Hello. My name's Jan.
Hey.
Good evening. Thanks for sharing. I'm part of the tech team, so I'm sitting all the way back here.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
First of all, thank you for such a powerful PowerPoint presentation. And I guess one of the most insightful things I've learned in today's and yesterday's talk was before listening to your PowerPoint, I thought that greed was something that is inherent in all of us, that it's some kind of hunger that you have to try your best to keep in check. But I guess what was the most profound is that when you're showing us the comparison between Vanuatu and the US, is that you can really curb these urges of greed and fear by providing fulfillment, cooperation, communication, and that trust. So I just thought that was so powerful, because every day I'm thinking, like, how can we spread that kind of, how do you say, insight on how to get people away from that greed and that kind of need, and like how to avoid people thinking that everything's like a zero-sum game, that if someone has more, I have less. So I just thought that when you were showing us a comparison, when these other cultures have trust, community, people to look out for, and a whole culture built around sharing, I just thought that, wow, we can achieve this. We can achieve a society without greed, without tension, without mistrust, and without conflict. So yeah, just thank you so much for just showing me that. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Kam. And Kam, this is what you said is so important. This is a concept that I didn't have time to talk much about, but the idea of zero-sum game. And I think you could see that in the criminal justice system, in the linear society, where you have a winner and a loser. You also see it in a linear economy where one person gets richer and richer and richer and everybody else loses. But why can't everybody win? And when you go to school and when you listen to the media, and even some religions preach that that people are inherently greedy, and that's just so-called human nature. So in other words, if you accept that, you're accepting their vision of what's normal, their vision of what's good, their vision of what's true as your vision. That's how they colonize your mind. And the process of decolonization, the process of undoing the domestication, is about that. It's about realizing that for most of human history, in most of human cultures, it wasn't that way, and it doesn't need to be that way. So in other words, this system that seems so big now, that seems so monstrous, that seems so powerful now, is actually, first of all, something very recent in human history. Number two, does not represent what most human cultures ever did. But number three is based on lies. is based on lies about what's true, lies about what's good, lies about what's normal. In other words, it has um, a very weak foundation, a very weak foundation. So when we speak truth to that lie, the lie has no power over us. So it may seem like the system is sometimes like, um, why am I even trying to fight against this system? Or why am I even trying to challenge this system? It seems so big, it's everywhere. It's in people's minds have been saturated with it. It seems so strong, but actually it's actually very weak. And it doesn't represent what most of our ancestors had for most of human history. So it's more like a blip, a blip that went wrong somehow that we need to correct. So yeah, it's about changing our understanding of what's normal, changing our understanding of what human nature is, changing our understanding of what's true. And that's something you can do right now. You can do it right now. Okay, Ryan.
Hello, hi.
Hello, how are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm okay. Yes, no, I'm. This is working with you is for me something that gives me fulfillment. So I'm in a very fulfilled place right now.
Okay. Yeah. Based on your lecture, I feel like I can relate it with indigenous practices in Borneo. Like for example, like what you say, from your experience with Kula system, where here in Sarawak, in Iban practices, we have this system Baduro, um, which mean one labor, one household will exchange labor with another household. So which mean the labor is very cheap. I'm not sure if in Sabah, I heard about tabang practices before, where the indigenous people they exchange labor. So I can feel the relation between
Yes.
these practices, and I think it's very good because it will be sustainable because low cost and the technology used also is not very destructive because they usually use manual labor. They are using instead of big machines, they just use hands and their legs to maneuvering and to do many things, hard labor lah. Yeah, that's how I feel. It has very close connection with indigenous people in here.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yes. Okay, Ryan. That is. Those are excellent examples, and you know, you may not know when you're going to need it. It's you know, it's like um, the all of these circular economies, all of these circular politics, all of these relationships, these networks, they're like our banks and our pharmacies and our hospitals and our schools. In other words, and our insurance. So you know, you don't know. Maybe there's a typhoon, and you lose your house, but you always know that because you at one point helped in to do a big job for somebody in your community, that the people of your community will come back and do a job that you need to do that you may not be able to do yourself. Your ancestors had their own pharmacy you and give you side effects, and also a pharmacy where you didn't need to use money. Your ancestors had the bank In other words, they knew it would organize itself to make sure that whatever you needed in terms of labor was there, because they knew that if they had an accident or an emergency, you would go and help them as well. So these labor exchanges that you were talking about, yes. So it's almost as if um, when the British came, uh, they brought institutions that actually people already had, and the ones that the people already had worked better for the community, because first of all, they didn't involve money, so that people didn't have to go and do money work or slave work for somebody else to get the money to pay for the medicine or to pay for whatever they needed. But also, as people were working together, as people were exchanging labor, it also cemented relationships. So in other words, it's more than just a labor exchange. It's an exchange of love. It's an exchange of goodwill. It's an exchange on so many different levels. And a lot of places, what happens is when you get those labor exchanges, the people who are receiving the labor have to feed the people who do the work. So it's also an exchange in terms of food. So I know that in Vanuatu, when people do these labor exchanges, say if I need to build a house, then the people of the village will come and build a house for me, but my job is to feed them. And so there's an exchange there while they are working. So those are the kinds of things. And so it builds so much more than just uh, a labor exchange. It means so much more. So yeah, so those are the kind of things that are the foundation upon which Forever Sabah and all the other organizations that are working in Northern Borneo can really build on. You know, those are really solid foundations. And if people are still doing it, that is a really, really, really solid and uh, solid and potentially potentially revolutionary kind of foundation that you can build something on. And it has so much, there's so much energy there, it has so much potential. So to me, when I see things like that happening in villages or places where it could be an indigenous place or it could be in a city where people are doing these types of exchanges, to me, that number one makes me remember that we all have this capacity and we all have this memory of what our ancestors did. So it's the memory is not dead, the memory is still there. But number two, it gives me hope for the future, because you can see that all of these things that we learn in school, that people are just selfish, that people are just greedy. That's not true. That actually there's a lot of things in the things that people do, the way people think and the way people speak in their lives today, that give us what we need to create a different future.
I thank you, Nick. That was awesome. Yeah, you're sharing this morning from last night, and especially in the end, how we conclude that we have to start now. Sometimes, because I work with children also among indigenous communities, and I also work with youths, and I do get this question. They said, oh, they're not, they have to go, they have to be in town, they have to work, so we cannot practice the indigenous values. But the answers and the sharing just now, that actually wherever you are, that you can practice it. It's now, it begins with the mind, and doing it yourself and sharing it with others, and and actually in the community sometimes it's much more easier. But of course within the community, there is also those leaders who might, even if we try to do things together, there are those leaders that who are what we call colonized or domesticated. That's the work that we do when we do community organizing, that we also face a lot of challenges, but now we understand why it is. So it gives me that light and understanding deeper on how we can continue the work, especially in community organizing, both in the rural area and also in the urban area, and how we can bring back these values, because that will bring us that, give us that sovereignty. And the other thing is, because we said, like as an organization, we work for the indigenous rights, but now I think I begin to understand this. It has to go beyond the rights. It has to go beyond that. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anne. And you know that we weren't able to talk a lot about rights and power, but this is something that if we had more time we could. But I just want to share a little bit of a story, a very short story. So in Papua New Guinea, pigs are very important. So when people do exchanges, they often involve pigs. So when people exchange pigs, there are so many levels of meaning. It's not just about pigs. It's also, there's a spiritual side. There's a side that connects families. There's so many levels. But anyway, what they say is that my indigenous sovereignty is like the leg of a pig. Okay, so the leg of the pig has meat and a bone. Okay, that sovereignty that I have over land, for example, is like holding the leg of the pig in my hand. But there are people in the government that want me to register my land. And they tell me that if I register my land, they'll give me a piece of paper, a title that will make me a landowner. Okay, and that sort of corruption, that sort of patronage makes one person feel better than somebody else and makes one person feel like they have control. But actually, when you register your land under the government system, the government takes sovereignty over your land, and all you have is that piece of paper, the title, that only gives you the right to the land. So what they say in Papua New Guinea is, if I keep my land under my indigenous laws, I'm holding the leg of the pig with the meat and the bone. But if I register my land, then I'm giving the leg of the pig to the government. And then the government takes the meat and gives it to the company and then gives me back the bone. And that's my right. So in other words, if you have sovereignty, if you have power, you have all the rights. And nobody can take those rights away from you. But if you only have rights and you don't have power, the power is in the parliament or the power is somewhere else. And then those rights can be given to you today and they can be taken away from you tomorrow. That's the difference between power and rights. And I'm not saying it's not important to struggle for rights. Yes, rights are important. The struggles for rights are important. We have to fight for our rights, but we have to realize, just like you said, that there's something more than rights. That our struggle for rights should not end with something more than rights. That our should keep struggling until we achieve sovereignty. In other words, rights are a step along the way to something bigger. And when we achieve sovereignty, we have all the rights and nobody can ever take any of those rights away from us.
And anyone else? Any voices online?
Casey. Neville. Okay.
Thank you so much, Nick, for this beautiful presentation. I cannot help but keep wondering now, how do we approach this, especially when working with communities? Before this, I realized that we've encouraged communities to reclaim those rights based on the foundation, based on colonial foundations, like colonial laws, colonial ways of doing things, and to advocate for the rights or for the community to, be able to reclaim the power. They have to use those instruments instead. So I've been talking to community about, do you know what is your rights according to our enactments or ordinance? And then, I just have but wonder now, should we just ignore those things and just let the communities just focus on their landscape? But that can be dangerous too. You know what I mean? Because if communities are not aware of that, then they'll use it just in a blink of an eye. That's why a lot of communities have to educate themselves about the law.
Yeah.
To conform.
So, go ahead. Yeah. So really important point, and this connects with several different things that that were mentioned. Now, last night, Ilan mentioned something about the actually, let's see, I guess it was morning for you and night for me. So in Ilan's session, she mentioned about the understandings of indigenous peoples as people who wear feathers or something like that. Okay, so, and then we're talking about now indigenous peoples as actually not people who are closed off, not people who were not open to other ways of doing things, other sciences, other technologies, etc. So we know, for example, that indigenous peoples shared so much. They shared different types of food crops, for example, so that one group of indigenous people would adopt food crops from another group. But when they planted those food crops, when they okay, before, okay, so basically that process involved reading and writing life. Okay, so the first step before they accepted the new food crop, okay, say if it was let's see, something from the Americas that came to Sabah, maybe something like potato. Okay, are there people in Sabah who plant potato? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, but before you do that, before you started planting potatoes, they came from somewhere else. So the first step, you read that. You read those potatoes. Are those potatoes something that is going to bring life to your community, or are those potatoes something that's going to damage your community? And you realize that no, those potatoes are something good, we will take them. But when you take them, you write your life. In other words, you plant those potatoes the way people in Sabah plant things, not the way people in South America plant things, even though the potatoes came from South America. So in other words, when we're talking about things from the outside, even colonial things, okay, when we're talking about sovereignty, it doesn't mean that you immediately reject them, anything from the outside. No, it means when something comes from the outside, you read it. Is this something that's going to help me or hurt me? Is this going to give life to my community or damage my community? Is this going to give me life or damage my life? Okay. If it's some kind of a sovereign relationship with this thing, in other words, you don't allow this thing to control you, you control this thing. That's sovereignty. So in other words, sovereignty doesn't mean that you close everything out from the outside. Nothing, nothing. I'm not going to allow anything in. No. Sovereignty means is if you see something new, you read it. Find out what's behind it. Is it something that's going to help you in your community or harm you in your community? If it's something that can help you, then you take it in, you take it into your community, but you make sure that this thing works in your interest and not you working in its interest. It's about control. And this is also about migration. So we said over and over again, I said over and over again the last two sessions, that in many indigenous communities, people from the outside come in. But when people from the outside come in, they are welcome. They're welcome because people have security. If I have complete land and food and housing security, I can welcome somebody from the outside. Maybe they had a typhoon in their place and they had to run away. And when they come to my place, and I welcome them. And I tell the young people to build them a house. And I say, okay, there's some land that we don't use, make your garden there. But every year at a certain time, they take some food from that garden and they bring it to me to show that they understand who traditionally is the person who looks after that land, and to make sure that when they come to my place or our place, they follow our laws. Okay, so this is something interesting too, because when things come from the outside, they should follow your laws. Okay, so if you go to Britain, if you go to Australia, if you go to Indonesia, you have to follow their laws. If you want to make a business in Britain, if you want to make a business in the US, you have to follow the laws of Britain, or you have to follow the laws of the US, right? But it's funny, when they come to Sabah, which laws do they follow? In other words, a lot of times they'll say, well, we can't make a business on your land until you register it. But that registration is not your customary law. So here they are coming to your place and making you register your land under their laws. So that shows that these people have not come to Sabah with your interests in mind. They have come to steal your land, and they're going to use their own laws to steal your land. So in other words, if anybody comes to Sabah and tells you, we're not going to, or some a company from another country, or a businessman from another country comes to your place and says, well, I want to do this project, but you have to register your land first, that's the sign that that person is not serious. That person has come to steal. That person has not come to do anything else but steal. If they were really serious, they would say, here, I have this project I can do. There's this business we can do. But since I am in your place, I am in your country, I have to follow your laws.
Hi, Nick. Thank you very much for your session. The whole time I'm listening to you, I feel my body shakes. I don't know why. maybe we have interacted, well, through the mind, but spiritually and also body, I can feel. There's a lot of affirmation that I receive in the work that we are doing, and also the thoughts that I have. But also there's a lot of challenging things that's coming forth. And towards the end, I'm also happy and enlightened because you give, not just the macro things, but also the micro steps that you say you can start from yourself. And I feel that is what I have been keeping in terms of the heritage and the wisdoms from my ancestors and the surroundings that I have, the community. But also within now that we are working with so many people, and just now, my colleague Devil said, we are working in actually almost like persuading people to look into the what we call the laws and enactment, how they can participate in well, conserving or protecting the area, but as well as agreeing to the terms. So it is very challenging, yeah. Yeah, challenging things. And if I reflect even closer to myself within the family, in our small family, which now my son will consume a lot of those food. He prefers to eat more of the packed food rather than enjoying, for instance, like what we take sweet potato or cassava, which for us that grew up as a farmer and then educated, there's a huge gap, and I feel the challenge on how to bring this secular, the respect to nature, elders, and the wisdom of the ancestors within the close family of myself, and then bring the idea that we have talked about today to the immediate family that we have. It's really challenging, to have this kind of a mountaintop session. I mean, this is planned, and then we sit down and listen because maybe we have a structure, an institution that we already, assign, agree to and believe. But then there's this huge challenge. We also belong to the family that's so diverse, and also the belief or the religion around us that is already in this structure. But I am glad, still I am glad, because the session also opened the mind, open the mind that these are the things that is linear and secular, and telling how to read, how to analyze, how to reflect deeper, and then how to start writing. That means how to start doing. Have this kind of a mountaintop session. This is planned, and then we sit down and listen because maybe we have a structure, an institution that we already, assign, agree to and believe. But then there's this huge challenge. We also belong to the family that's so diverse, and also the belief or the religion around us that is already in this structure. But I am glad, still I am glad, because the session also opened the mind, open the mind that these are the things that is linear and secular, and telling how to read, how to analyze, how to reflect deeper, and then how to start writing. That means how to start doing. So it is good. That's why I'm like this. Maybe I try to hold Also, I want to cry, also have. But because we are in a group of people and there's this online connection, there's also probably that's why I'm holding. So thank you very much, and I'm so thankful. Maybe, not maybe, definitely in future we can be together in this land. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Winnie. Yes, this is a very challenging thing, the food. It's one of the things that you can start with, but it's also very challenging because a lot of the foods that young people are eating are addictive foods. Because salt and sugar and fat and all of those flavorings are very addictive. And so those foods are designed to make young people addicted to them so they won't eat anything else. So this is a very big challenge. One interesting example from Vanuatu, one of the provinces of Vanuatu has said no more fast food. So in other words, the whole province, there's no fast food allowed in the province. So the government of the province has decided that they will not do fast food anymore. Also, I don't know if how hooked or how connected Forever Sabah is with the slow food movement. Do you connect with them?
Thank you. Sorry, we lost our speech for a moment. Yes, we are in a slow dance towards the slow food movement. But yes,
Yeah.
it's definitely in our field of consciousness.
Yeah, okay, good. Because there's an international movement now to get away from fast food, and there are lots of people doing lots of interesting things. So Winnie, it's not an easy thing, but there are people all around the world who have the same ideas as you, and are trying all kinds of creative ways to do it. So there are people in the slow food movement who can share their stories about how they deal with the problem of their children being addicted to these fast foods. And so maybe there's something clever somebody's doing somewhere, or creative somebody's doing somewhere. You can connect with them and share with them what they're doing with their children. Maybe they can also share what they're doing with or the things that they've done that are successful. They can share their successes and their failures with their children with you, so you give it can give you some new ideas about different things you can try, but also to give you a sense that you're not alone. There are lots of people facing the same thing as you're facing, and there are ways to share the knowledge, what you're learning from that experience with them. So that's those are good people to hook up with when you're struggling with something like your children not wanting to eat the foods that give them life, but they're eating foods that are actually damaging them, and actually death-seeking foods instead of life-seeking foods.
Thank you, Nick. So there's a last person, Casey, who wants to say something, and then I think we'll wrap up. Casey is representing from Malaya.
Dr. Nicholas, I think to capitalize on your 12 hours away experience, your vast experience working all over the world, right? So I think I'm more keen on moving forward, right? So you have spoken about linearity, secularity, and people coming into our place, dictating what to do and all that. So if you have one key advice for all of us, because we are always grappling with, funders want us to do it this way, the government agency want us to do it this way. Funder says we just want to work with apes, we don't want to work with any other animal. So we are being confronted with many, many people who come in and say, this is how we want it to be done, right? And then my colleague Yana also said she has trouble doing the reporting because the reporting is always linear. So in very practical real life issues as the context, what is your single advice you can give us on, is there a way, do you have any experience how that, you know, it works? How do we slowly probably convince our funders, you know, our partners and all that to go toward the circular way? One key blow. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, I guess for me, it's always been about um, taking my cues from the community. So in other words, you have the demands of the funders, you have the demands of different agencies involved, but actually, if if you if you actually go to a community and actually allow the community to, as much as possible, take control over the situation, to take control over the process of identifying problems, analyzing problems, solving problems, but also determining the direction in which the project goes. Because, okay, just an example from my life. I explained to you what happened to me when I went to Nigeria. And I went with an agenda that was determined by a funding agency to do research, a linguistic research on the Creole language spoken in Nigeria, Nigerian Creole. So it's a language that's a lot like Jamaican, for example. It's got English words, but a lot of African structures. In any case, that's what I was supposed to do when I went to Nigeria. That's what they gave me money to do. But when I got there, I realized that, number one, if I did my research in the traditional way, it would be very colonizing. In other words, here I come to steal something from Nigeria, some knowledge, to go and get my PhD or do something that would get recognition in a university somewhere else. And I didn't believe in that. So basically what I said when I went there is that, wait, don't worry about my agenda. It's true that I have made an application and that they gave me money to do this work, to study the Creole spoken in Nigeria. But I think the best way to accomplish to make the most of my being here in terms of what I can share with the people in Nigeria and what the people in Nigeria can share with me is to connect with the community around a real problem. So basically, I told the professor, she was sitting in the room, there was Mr. Etete sitting in the corner, and she said, "What's your agenda?" And I said to her, "No, don't worry about my agenda. Don't worry about what the funding agency had to do. Where is a meaningful way in which I can connect with the community right here?" And so she introduced me to Mr. Etete. And Mr. Etete community had decided they wanted somebody to come, a linguist, to actually help them to solve a practical problem. They wanted somebody to write their language, which had never been written before, to make a grammar of their language so they could teach their children reading and writing in their language before they learn to read and write in English. Okay, so I explained that yesterday. But what I didn't explain yesterday was I had to learn Mr. Etete's language. I went to the village, I lived there, and I learned the language in order to write a grammar. But while I was learning the language, as I said, this is an indigenous community, and they spoke many languages. So while I was learning their language, I was also learning Nigerian Creole. So in other words, I was accomplishing both at the same time. So for me, the best way to handle those kinds of situations is to take my cue from the community, try to connect with a community around a real issue that they have. And in the end, what I found is I didn't just learn the language of the community, their indigenous language, but I also learned the language I was supposed to be learning for my funding agency. And then I was able to write a grammar of the Creole language as well, but through the perspective of an African language, which means that my work on that language was different from the work that other people in the US or Europe were doing, because they were still seeing things through European eyes, and they were trying to describe the language and write about the language through a European understanding of what language is and the way language works. But because I had learned the language of the community, I gained an African perspective on the way language works. And that meant so what I had promised the funding agency I would do, I did a much better job doing that by not following the agenda that they told me that I had to follow. So in other words, now I know every situation is different. You know, I'm not saying that everybody is going to be able to do it just like that. But that's when I went to Papua New Guinea, it was the same way. I went to Papua New Guinea, I was supposed to do research. But again, they asked me what my agenda was. I told them, no, what do you want me to do? And they sent me to villages to work on these types of programs again. But in that process, I achieved not only what the community wanted, but also I achieved what the funding agency wanted, and I achieved it better than others were achieving, even for the funding agency, because I was doing it from a bottom-up approach. So I guess if there's one main thing I could advise is basically connect at that community level and then build from below. Build from below. And then what you'll find is usually the results are so good from that process, so much better than what other people are trying to do top down, that in the end, you'll not only meet your community's needs, but you will also, if your funding agency has any kind of open mind about it, they will see that actually you're accomplishing what you set out to do, what you promised you would do under the contract or under the project proposal, but in a much better way than if you'd approached it in a top-down way, or put what the funding agency wanted first. I don't know if that helped.
Thank you, Nick. I think what Nick has described is what I've been calling vertical literacy. So you understand the top down, and you understand and build your faculty and your capacity to understand the bottom up. Because this is our job, right? We're basically communicators, and we want to be effective, and we want to be change makers. So it's our job to have the literacy. So it doesn't have to be either or.
Yes.
We don't want to perpetuate the othering or the demonizing. But it is our job as change makers to understand the constructs and the language within those constructs. So it's almost 10:30, and Nick has been sitting in front of the linear box for 3 hours. I think we have to let him go to sleep. This is not the end, it's the beginning. Now you guys know that someone called Nick Faraklas exists on the planet. And it's the beginning of our relationship, Sabah's relationship with him, and his with ours. And I'm pretty sure he'll land at some point on the the earth and in the waters here. So, in the spirit of sharing from our baskets, can we all turn on our cameras and share from our baskets with Nick? Show some love, a big hand, etc. Anything that he can go to sleep with. All right. Good night, Nick. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Good night.
Yes. Keep up the good work.